Have you ever uncovered a hidden secret? Emily, just 8 years old, thought it was a normal day until she heard a faint cry in the woods. What she found was shocking. A German shepherd, tied up, shivering, and helpless. Who did this? Why was he waiting? What she didn't know was that this dog held a powerful secret that would change a man's life forever. Stay until the end for an emotional twist. Comment where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the for more heartwarming stories. Now, let's dive in. Are you ready? The crisp morning air carried the scent of damp earth and pine as Emily Parker stepped outside, her boots crunching against the frost-kissed grass. It was early winter in Fort Collins, Colorado, and the vast farmland stretched endlessly before her, framed by towering pine trees and rolling hills dusted with the first light snowfall of the season. Emily, an 8-year-old with an adventurous spirit and a heart full of curiosity, was visiting the ranch owned by Robert Hayes, the father of her best friend, Sophia. The Hayes family had invited her over for the weekend, and she had been thrilled by the idea of spending time in the countryside, away from the bustle of her suburban life in Denver. "Come on, Emily," Sophia called out from the wooden fence that bordered the property. Her cheeks were rosy from the cold, and strands of her blonde hair peeked out from under a woolen hat. "Let's go feed the horses before breakfast." Emily grinned, adjusting her knitted scarf. "Give me 5 minutes. I want to check out that old barn first," she said, pointing toward a weathered structure at the edge of the property. Sophia hesitated. "Dad said to stay close to the house. There's been talk of coyotes around here." Emily waved a dismissive hand. "I'll be quick." With that, she jogged across the field, her breath coming out in soft puffs of vapor. The barn, once painted red, had faded to a dull, peeling brown, its roof slightly caved in on one side. It looked abandoned, yet it intrigued her. But just as she was about to step inside, a faint sound carried through the trees, a weak, almost desperate whimper. She froze. Turning toward the dense tree line at the back of the property, she heard it again. A faint, muffled barking, like a cry for help. Her pulse quickened. "A dog? Out here? Hello," she called out, taking cautious steps toward the sound. There was no response, only the lonely rustling of leaves in the cold breeze. Emily hesitated for a second, then took a deep breath and stepped into the woods. The trees were tall and thick, their gnarled branches forming a canopy that dimmed the morning light. The ground was littered with fallen leaves and twigs, and with every step, the barking grew weaker, more desperate. Then, she saw it. Tied to a thin tree trunk, barely visible in the dim light, was a German shepherd. The dog's body was thin, his ribs visible beneath his unkempt fur, which was matted with mud and patches of what looked like dried blood. His legs trembled as he tried to shift his weight, but the nylon ropes binding him were so tight around his chest and neck that they cut into his skin. His ears drooped, and his amber eyes, dull and clouded with exhaustion, locked onto Emily's with a silent plea. "Oh my God," Emily whispered, her stomach twisting in horror. She took a step closer, but the dog flinched, letting out a low, fearful growl. Hey, it's okay," she said softly, kneeling at a safe distance. "I won't hurt you." The dog didn't move, his breathing shallow and labored. How long had he been out here? Who would do this to him? Emily knew she couldn't free him alone. The knots on the rope looked professionally tied, not just some random accident. Someone had put him here on purpose. Her hands shook as she stood up. "I'll get help, okay? I promise." She turned and sprinted back toward the house, her heart pounding. Branches scraped against her arms, but she didn't care. Her only thought was to get to Robert as fast as possible. By the time she reached the front porch, she was out of breath, her face flushed with urgency. "Robert!" "Sophia! Someone tied a dog up in the woods," she shouted. Robert Hayes, a broad-shouldered man in his 40s, stepped out of the ranch house, his face immediately darkening at the panic in Emily's voice. He had a rugged look, with a beard peppered with gray and hands calloused from years of working on the land. "What did you say?" he asked, setting down his coffee mug. "A dog," Emily gasped, pointing toward the woods. "He's tied up, really tight, and he looks really bad." Robert didn't hesitate. Show me. Sophia, who had just come outside, grabbed Emily's arm. Are you serious? What kind of dog? A German Shepherd, I think, Emily said quickly. He looks like he's been out there for a long time. Robert grabbed his coat and flashlight. Stay here, girls. I'll go check it out. No, Emily insisted. I know where he is. I can take you. Robert studied her for a second before nodding. All right, stay close. As they made their way back into the woods, the tension hung thick in the air. Emily could feel her own heart hammering against her ribs. A few minutes later, they reached the tree where the dog was tied. Robert stopped in his tracks, cursing under his breath. Son of a bitch, he muttered, stepping closer. The dog let out a weak whimper, his body collapsing slightly as if he no longer had the strength to hold himself up. Jesus Christ, Robert said, his jaw clenching. Someone really did a number on him. Emily swallowed hard. Can we help him? Robert reached for his pocket knife. We're gonna need more than just help, kid, he muttered. This is more than just a stray. This is deliberate. Emily felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. Who would do something like this? She whispered. Robert shook his head grimly. I don't know, but I intend to find out. Robert Hayes knelt beside the German Shepherd, his eyes dark with anger as he examined the tight nylon ropes cutting into the dog's fur. The animal barely had the strength to lift his head, and his breathing was labored. The sight made Robert's stomach twist. Who the hell would do something like this? Emily hovered nearby, biting her lip, her small hands clenched into fists. We have to help him, Mr. Hayes. Robert nodded, already pulling a hunting knife from his pocket. Hold still, buddy, he murmured, carefully sliding the blade beneath one of the ropes. He saw how deeply they had cut into the dog's flesh. Raw, red wounds where the fibers had dug in from prolonged pressure. The moment the knife touched the rope, the dog flinched and let out a low, warning growl. Emily took an instinctive step back, but Robert remained steady. Easy there, he said calmly. His voice was low, reassuring, authoritative, the way a man used to working with animals spoke. Nobody's gonna hurt you, boy. I promise. The shepherd whined softly, his body trembling as if he wanted to trust but still feared the worst. Robert worked quickly. The ropes were tightly knotted, and it took more effort than he expected to cut through them. As the last piece fell away, the dog collapsed onto the cold earth, too weak to stand on his own. Jesus, Robert muttered. He reached out carefully, running his rough fingers over the dog's ribs. He was severely underweight, dehydrated, and covered in scratches and bruises. This wasn't just neglect, this was intentional. Emily knelt beside him. Is he going to be okay? Robert exhaled. We need to get him inside. He's in bad shape. At that moment, the dog slowly turned his head toward Emily, his amber eyes locking onto hers. For a brief moment, something passed between them. A quiet understanding, a plea for help that didn't need words. Emily's heart squeezed. Come on, boy, she whispered. You're safe now. The dog didn't move. He simply lay there, breathing heavily. Robert sighed. I'll carry him. Carefully, he slid his strong arms under the shepherd's frail body. The dog stiffened at first, but when Robert lifted him, he let out a deep sigh, as if surrendering to whatever fate awaited him. Emily ran ahead as they made their way back to the farmhouse. Sophia, tell your mom to bring some towels and warm water. By the time Robert stepped onto the front porch, Sophia and her mother, Laura Hayes, were already there. Oh my God, Laura breathed when she saw the shepherd's pitiful state. What happened to him? Someone tied him up in the woods and left him to die, Robert said grimly. We need to warm him up and get some food in him. Laura ushered them inside. Lay him by the fireplace. I'll grab some blankets. Robert carefully set the dog down near the glowing warmth of the fireplace, where the flames crackled softly, casting a golden glow on the wooden floors. The shepherd shivered violently, his body not used to warmth anymore. Sophia crouched beside Emily, her eyes wide. Do you think he belongs to someone? Emily hesitated. I don't know, but someone cared enough to tie him up instead of just letting him go. That means something, right? Robert rubbed his face. exhaustion creeping in. It means whoever did this didn't want him found. Laura returned with towels and a bowl of lukewarm water, setting it down carefully. Try to get him to drink, she said, handing Emily a shallow dish. Emily gently nudged the water bowl toward the dog. Come on, buddy. Just a little. The shepherd didn't move at first, his dull eyes staring at the fire as if he was too tired to care. Then, after a long moment, he slowly lifted his head and lapped at the water, his movements weak but deliberate. Emily smiled. That's a good boy. Robert studied the dog's collar. It was simple, made of worn leather, and had no tags. He sighed. I'll call the sheriff's office. See if anyone's reported a missing shepherd. Emily tensed. What if no one claims him? Robert met her gaze, his expression unreadable. Then we figure out what happens next. But deep down, he had a bad feeling about this. Whoever left this dog here had a reason, and Robert intended to find out what the hell was going on. The farmhouse felt unusually quiet as Robert Hayes picked up the old landline phone hanging in the kitchen. The only sounds were the crackling fire and the occasional weak whimper from the German shepherd lying on the rug near the hearth. Emily and Sophia sat close by, watching the dog with wide, anxious eyes. Laura Hayes, standing by the counter, shot her husband a worried glance. You really think this is necessary, Robert? Robert sighed, rubbing his calloused fingers over his temples. This wasn't just someone losing their dog, Laura. This was cruelty. Deliberate. Someone left that poor animal to die out there. Emily, who had been stroking the dog's ear gently, looked up. Are they going to come and take him away? Robert hesitated before dialing. That depends on what they find out, kiddo. The call went through, and after 2 rings, a gruff voice answered. Fort Collins Sheriff's Office. Detective Carter speaking. Robert leaned against the counter. Hey, James, it's Robert Hayes over at the ranch. Listen, we got a situation. A kid found a German shepherd tied up in the woods behind my property. Someone left him there to die. There was a slight pause before Carter responded. Tied up? How bad? Robert glanced at the dog, who lay motionless except for the slow rise and fall of his ribs. His sunken eyes flickered toward the sound of Robert's voice, almost as if he understood that his fate was being decided. Pretty damn bad. He's skin and bones, dehydrated, and those ropes were cutting into him. Someone made sure he wouldn't get away. Carter exhaled on the other end of the line. That's not just abandonment. That's intentional cruelty. I'll come out and take a look. Appreciate it. And James, bring your kit. I want to know who the hell did this. On my way. Robert hung up the phone, his jaw tight. He had known Carter for years. They played on the same softball league in the summers and had hunted together in the backwoods a few times. He was a no-nonsense kind of cop, the kind who didn't let things slide. If anyone could figure this out, it was him. Emily swallowed hard. What if the person who did this comes back? Robert looked at her, his expression unreadable. If they do, they'll regret it. Laura shot him a sharp look. Robert. He shook his head. I don't mean anything drastic. But whoever did this needs to answer for it. They didn't have to wait long. Within 20 minutes, the distant sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway signaled Detective James Carter's arrival. Detective Carter arrives. Carter stepped out of his dark blue Ford Explorer, the sheriff's department logo gleaming under the weak winter sunlight. He was in his early 40s, built like a man who had spent years on the job, with a square jaw, tired eyes, and a no-nonsense demeanor. His badge was clipped to his belt, and a notepad was already in his hand as he approached the porch. Morning, Robert, Carter greeted, his gaze immediately landing on the German shepherd lying inside by the fire. His eyes narrowed in concern. Damn, he muttered. Poor thing. Robert stepped aside to let him in. Emily found him in the woods, tied up so tight he couldn't move. Carter crouched down near the dog. He wasn't a soft man, but there was a flicker of genuine sadness in his face as he examined the scars and fresh wounds along the dog's neck where the ropes had cut into his skin. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing, Carter said darkly. Emily, who had been holding her breath, finally spoke. Can you find out who did it? Carter nodded. I'll do my best, kid. Pulling on latex gloves, He carefully examined the dog's collar. No tags. That's suspicious. Most people microchip their dogs nowadays. He reached into his evidence kit and pulled out a small scanner. After running it over the shepherd's neck, a faint beep sounded. "Well, look at that," Carter murmured. He pulled out his radio. "Dispatch, this is Carter. Running a scan on a German shepherd found at Hayes Ranch. Send me any registered owner data." Static crackled before the response came. "Checking now. Stand by." The room was silent, everyone holding their breath. Even the dog, as weak as he was, seemed to sense that something important was happening. A moment later, dispatch responded. "Detective Carter, we have a match. Registered owner, Michael Evans, former Army sergeant. Last known address." "Well, that's strange." Carter frowned. "What's strange?" "The address on file was vacated over a year ago. No forwarding address. Looks like Mr. Evans is off the grid." Robert folded his arms. "A veteran?" Carter nodded. "Looks like it. If this was his dog, something must have happened to make him abandon it, or someone else took it from him." Emily, who had been listening intently, suddenly spoke up. What if he didn't abandon him? What if something bad happened to him? Carter exchanged a look with Robert. The kid had a point. "I think," Carter said, standing up, "we just found our first real lead." The suspicion grows. Carter snapped a few photos of the dog, making sure to document his injuries for evidence. "If this guy Evans is still in town, someone must know where he is," he said. "I'll ask around." Robert crossed his arms. "And if you don't find him?" Carter exhaled. "Then we start looking for whoever the hell tried to kill this dog." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't just a sad case of an abandoned animal. This was the beginning of something much bigger. The tension in the farmhouse lingered long after Detective Carter finished his examination of the German shepherd. Emily sat cross-legged on the floor beside the dog, her small hands hovering hesitantly over his fur. He was still weak, his breathing shallow, but there was something about the way he watched her, intensely, almost knowingly, that sent a strange feeling through her chest. "You think he remembers his owner?" she asked, looking up at Carter. Carter took a slow sip of his coffee, his expression unreadable. Dogs don't forget the people they love. If Michael Evans was his handler, he's still waiting for him. Robert sighed, leaning against the kitchen counter. But if that's true, why was he tied up in the woods? Something doesn't add up. Before Carter could respond, the shepherd suddenly shifted, pushing himself up with a pained grunt. His muscles trembled from exhaustion, but he was determined to stand on his own. "Whoa, easy there, buddy," Robert murmured. The dog ignored him. Instead, he took a slow, wobbly step forward, not toward Carter, Robert, or even the water bowl. He walked straight to the back door. Emily, Sophia, and the adults exchanged glances. The shepherd sat down right in front of the door, his tail curling around his body. Then, with deliberate intent, he lifted his paw and pressed it against the wooden frame. It was as if he was waiting for something. Emily's breath caught in her throat. He wants to go outside." Robert frowned. "That doesn't make sense. He was just freezing out there." But Carter narrowed his eyes. "No," he muttered. "It does make sense." Laura looked confused. "What do you mean?" Carter set his coffee down and crouched beside the dog. He studied him carefully, the tension in his body, the way his ears remained forward, alert but not aggressive. "This isn't just any dog," Carter said finally. "If Michael Evans was in the army, this shepherd might have been a working dog, military, maybe even law enforcement. That would explain why he's acting like this." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "Acting like what?" "Like he's on duty," Carter replied. He turned to Robert. "Let him out." Robert hesitated, but ultimately unlatched the door. The shepherd didn't bolt. He stepped out slowly, his nose twitching as he sniffed the cold air. Emily followed carefully, watching him as he moved deliberately toward the fence line, his tail stiff, his posture controlled. Then, suddenly, he froze. His ears perked straight up, his head snapping toward a dark corner of the property near the tree line. A low growl rumbled from his throat. Emily's heart slammed against her ribs. "What is it?" she whispered. Robert and Carter exchanged looks. They had both seen this kind of behavior before, not from an ordinary house pet, but from trained working dogs that detected something out of place. Carter's hand instinctively went to his hip, where his gun rested in its holster. "You hear something?" Robert asked. Carter didn't answer. Instead, he followed the shepherd's gaze toward the darkened edge of the property. The wind rustled the trees. Nothing else moved, but the shepherd's growling didn't stop. Then, a sound. A sharp rustle, something stepping on dry leaves just beyond the tree line. Emily gasped. "There's someone out there." Carter's grip on his gun tightened. "Robert, take the girls inside." "Now." Robert didn't argue. "Come on, girls. Let's go." His voice was tense as he ushered Emily and Sophia back toward the house. But Emily couldn't stop watching the shepherd. His muscles were tense, his tail raised. He knew something, or someone, was there. Carter took a cautious step forward. "Who's out there?" he called. Silence. Then, without warning, a shadow moved. A figure, tall, dressed in dark clothing, stepped out just far enough to be seen. Carter's stomach dropped. It wasn't just some trespasser. The man standing in the trees had been watching them, and when he realized he had been spotted, he turned and ran. The shepherd barked furiously, launching forward as if his instincts had taken over. Carter didn't hesitate. He took off after the mystery man, his boots pounding against the frozen ground. The chase was on. The sound of footsteps pounding against the frozen ground echoed through the trees as Detective Carter sprinted after the fleeing figure. The shepherd's barking grew more intense, his deep, authoritative voice slicing through the cold night air. Whoever this man was, he had been watching them, and he didn't want to be seen. Carter was fast, but the man had a head start and knew the terrain better. The detective dodged tree branches, his heart racing as he pushed forward. He could barely make out a dark silhouette weaving through the trees, getting farther and farther away. Then, a sudden drop. Carter skidded to a stop just before he reached the edge of a steep embankment, his breath visible in the frigid air. The man had disappeared into the darkness below. "Damn it," Carter muttered under his breath. The shepherd arrived seconds later, his paws digging into the soil as he stopped beside Carter, still growling in the direction the intruder had vanished. Carter looked down at him, catching his breath. "What did you just warn us about, boy?" The dog didn't react to his words. He simply stood tall, ears forward, every muscle in his body tense. Carter sighed and pulled out his radio. "Dispatch, this is Carter. I got a trespasser on the Hayes property. Took off westbound past the fence line into the woods. Might need a patrol to sweep the area later." A voice crackled back. "Copy that, Carter. Any details on the suspect?" "Male, 6-foot range, dressed in dark clothing." "Too fast to get a better look," Carter replied. He exhaled and looked back toward the farmhouse, where Robert stood on the porch, Emily gripping his jacket with wide, nervous eyes. "Understood. We'll send a unit to check it out," the dispatcher responded. Carter hooked his radio back to his belt. He was frustrated, but he knew when a chase was a lost cause. The man had a clear escape route, and Carter didn't want to risk going into unfamiliar terrain blind. "Let's go back, buddy," he muttered to the shepherd. The dog hesitated, sniffing the air one last time before finally turning back toward the house. Inside the farmhouse, the tension was thick when Carter stepped back inside. Laura had ushered Emily and Sophia to the kitchen, where they sat at the table, eyes wide with fear. Robert leaned against the counter, arms crossed tightly. "Did you catch him?" Robert asked. Carter shook his head. "No, but he was watching." "That's not random." Emily's voice was small but firm. "You think it's the same person who hurt the dog?" Carter sighed. "Maybe, maybe not. But someone sure as hell doesn't want us asking questions." As if on cue, the shepherd walked past them, moving with deliberate purpose toward the couch. He sat down and began scratching at his collar, something he hadn't done before. Emily tilted her head. "What's he doing?" Before anyone could answer, the dog suddenly pawed at the leather strap around his neck, his nails digging at something wedged inside. And then, a crumpled piece of paper slipped out from under the collar. Silence. Everyone stared at it, as if the very existence of the note changed everything. Robert's expression darkened. That was inside his collar the whole time? Carter took a step forward, his jaw tight. He reached down and carefully picked up the small, dirt-stained piece of paper, unfolding it slowly. The handwriting was messy, rushed, as if whoever wrote it didn't have much time. He is a hero, but I can't take care of him anymore. Please help him. Don't let them find him. The room fell deathly silent. Emily clutched her hands together. What does it mean? Carter read the words again, his stomach tightening. This wasn't just abandonment. This was a warning. Whoever left this dog didn't do it because they wanted to, Carter said grimly. They were running from something. Robert rubbed his jaw. You think this Michael Evans guy wrote it? Carter wasn't sure. The name on the dog's registration had been Michael Evans, but this note suggested something bigger. One thing was certain. This shepherd wasn't just any dog. Someone had gone to great lengths to keep him hidden, and now they had someone watching them. Carter folded the note, sliding it into his pocket. I need to find Michael Evans. Fast. Emily glanced nervously toward the door, where the dog sat staring outside, his ears twitching as if he was still listening for something. For the first time since this whole thing started, she felt truly afraid. The farmhouse was eerily silent after the discovery of the mysterious note. The shepherd remained near the door, ears twitching at the slightest sound, his posture alert. Emily sat stiffly in one of the kitchen chairs, chewing anxiously on her sleeve, while Sophia watched everything with wide eyes. Robert leaned against the counter, arms crossed, while Laura moved around the kitchen, making tea nobody would drink. Detective Carter stood in the center of the room, turning the note over in his fingers, his mind racing. Whoever had written it was afraid. Afraid enough to abandon a dog, but still desperate enough to make sure he ended up somewhere safe. And the fact that someone had been watching them tonight? That wasn't a coincidence. Carter turned to Robert. I need to find Michael Evans. Now. Robert frowned. You said the last known address on his registration was a dead end? Yeah, but that doesn't mean he disappeared off the face of the earth. Carter pulled out his cell phone, swiping through his contacts. I know a guy who can run his name through a few databases. See if we can find where he went after he left that address. Emily suddenly spoke, her voice hesitant. What if he didn't leave on his own? Carter's fingers hovered over the screen, considering her words. It was a chilling thought. Then we're in deeper trouble than I thought, he muttered. Searching for Michael Evans, Carter stepped onto the porch to make the call, the cold air biting against his skin. The sky was clear, but the night felt heavier than before, like something unseen was pressing down on them. He dialed a number, listening to the ring. A gruff voice picked up. Yeah. Hey, Adam. It's Carter. I need a favor. A pause. Then, a low chuckle. You always need a favor. This one's important. Got a missing person case, kind of. Name's Michael Evans. Former Army sergeant. Last known address was a rental out near Fort Collins, but he's been off the grid for over a year. Another pause. Military? You thinking PTSD or something worse? Carter sighed. Not sure yet, but I got a German shepherd that was registered to him, and someone went through a hell of a lot of trouble to get rid of the dog without killing him. That doesn't add up. Adam whistled. Shit. All right, I'll run it through and see if he popped up anywhere. Might take a few hours, though. Make it fast. And Adam, yeah. See if he has any police reports filed against him in the last few years. Assaults, threats, anything unusual. Something doesn't sit right about this. You think he's dangerous? Carter exhaled, glancing back at the farmhouse. Through the window, he could see Emily and Sophia sitting close together, the shepherd resting at their feet. I don't know, he admitted, but someone sure as hell thinks he is. An ominous lead. Carter ended the call and turned back toward the house. His gut told him he was missing something, a connection, a crucial detail that hadn't clicked yet. As he stepped back inside, his phone vibrated. He pulled it out, expecting a message from Adam, but the screen displayed an unknown number. He frowned, answering cautiously. Carter. A moment of silence. Then, a voice, low, raspy, barely above a whisper. Stop looking for him. Carter froze. The line went dead. His grip tightened around the phone. His blood ran cold. Who the hell had just called him? And more importantly, how did they know he was looking for Michael Evans? Emily noticed his expression. Detective Carter? What's wrong? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at the shepherd, who was still watching the door, his muscles tensed. Carter's gut twisted. This wasn't just about a dog anymore. Something very dangerous was coming, and now they were in the middle of it. The farmhouse was eerily silent after Carter hung up the phone. The weight of the anonymous warning sat heavy in his chest. Stop looking for him. It wasn't just a warning, it was a threat. Whoever had called knew he was searching for Michael Evans. That meant they were either watching or had inside information. Carter exhaled slowly, forcing himself to remain calm. Panic never helped an investigation. It only clouded judgment. Instead, he clenched his jaw and turned back toward the kitchen, where Robert, Laura, and the girls were still waiting. Emily's small face was pinched with worry. Was that about Mr. Evans? Carter studied her for a long moment. He had worked on countless cases, some far worse than this, but there was something different about this one. Maybe it was the fact that Emily had found the dog, and now she was caught up in something bigger than she could understand. Or maybe it was the dog itself, a silent, living clue that held a story no one had pieced together yet. Carter sighed and sat down at the table. We need to talk. The search for Michael Evans intensifies. Robert leaned forward. What did you find out? Carter set his phone on the table. A contact of mine is running Michael Evans through the system. Military records, police reports, anything we can dig up. But before I could get any real information, he hesitated. Laura frowned. What? Carter's eyes darkened. I got a call. Unknown number. Someone told me to stop looking for him. Silence. Robert's expression hardened. Someone's watching? Carter nodded. Has to be. Either that or someone got word really damn fast that I was poking around. Emily swallowed. Does that mean he's in danger? Carter hesitated before answering. I don't know, but it sure as hell means somebody doesn't want us finding out. Sophia, who had been silent this whole time, spoke up. What if he's hiding? Maybe he's scared too. Carter considered that. It's possible, but scared of what? Or who? The shepherd, who had been resting at Emily's feet, suddenly lifted his head. His ears twitched sharply, his gaze locked onto Carter as if sensing the change in mood. Carter studied him carefully. The dog had been through something bad, but he wasn't just a victim. He was trained, disciplined. Even in his weakened state, he was constantly assessing his surroundings. This dog wasn't just Michael Evans' pet. He had been a partner, a working dog. And that meant Michael Evans wasn't just some ordinary guy. A break in the case. Carter's phone suddenly buzzed on the table, making everyone jump. He snatched it up and saw a message from Adam. Adam, got something. Call me ASAP. Carter wasted no time. He pressed dial, and the call connected almost instantly. Tell me you got something, Carter said. Adam's voice was graver than usual. Yeah, but you're not gonna like it. Go on. You were right. Michael Evans was military. Served 2 tours overseas. Special operations. Robert raised an eyebrow. Special forces? Not exactly, Adam said, but close enough. He was a canine handler, worked with dogs like the one you've got. High-risk missions, classified ops. The guy was the real deal. Carter's stomach tightened. He had suspected military background, but this meant the shepherd wasn't just a trained dog. He was a soldier. Adam continued. Evans was honorably discharged 4 years ago. But here's where it gets weird. About 2 years after he got out, he vanished. His house was foreclosed. No employment records, nothing. It's like he just disappeared. Carter felt a cold chill run down his spine. That's not normal. No, it's not, Adam agreed. And one more thing. You asked if he had any reports filed against him? Carter gripped the phone tighter. Yeah. Adam hesitated. There's one report. An incident filed last year. Assault charge. But the case was sealed. That means someone doesn't want it being looked into. Silence stretched between them. Carter ran a hand down his face, frustration building in his chest. Sealed files? That means it's either military involvement or something worse. Adam lowered his voice. Exactly. Someone with power doesn't want anyone asking questions. Carter's mind was spinning. A decorated soldier. A sealed police file. A trained K-9 abandoned in the woods. A warning to stop searching. This wasn't just a case of a missing man. This was a cover-up. A shocking revelation. Carter ended the call and turned back to Robert and Laura, his face unreadable. Michael Evans isn't just missing. Someone made him disappear. Laura gasped. You think he's dead? Carter shook his head. I don't know. But I do know that dog didn't end up tied in the woods by accident. He glanced at the shepherd, who was staring at him intensely, almost as if he understood every word. Robert exhaled sharply. So what do we do now? Carter tapped his fingers against the table, thinking, I need to get into that sealed file. Find out what Evans was involved in before he vanished. Emily looked between them. And the dog? What happens to him? Carter met her eyes. Until we figure this out, he stays here. He's safer with you guys than anywhere else. But deep down, Carter had a nagging suspicion. The person who had been watching them, the man who ran into the woods, wasn't just some random trespasser. He had been checking to see if the dog was still alive, which meant whoever they were running from knew he was here. And they weren't done yet. Detective Carter sat on the farmhouse porch, staring into the darkness. The events of the night had left too many unanswered questions, and the worst part was, they weren't even close to understanding what was really going on. The shepherd lay at his feet, his breathing now steady, his body visibly stronger after some rest and food. But the dog's eyes never stopped scanning the surroundings. He was always on alert, as if expecting danger to appear at any moment. Carter exhaled, rubbing his hands together for warmth. He knew one thing for sure. Michael Evans wasn't just missing. He was hiding, and someone wanted him to stay that way. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Adam. Carter answered immediately. Tell me you got something. Adam's voice was tense. I found him. Carter sat up straight. Where? VA shelter in Denver. Registered under an alias, but the fingerprints matched. He's been staying there for about 8 months, keeping his head down. No job, no official records, nothing. He doesn't want to be found. Carter's grip tightened on his phone. That means someone's after him. Yeah, Adam agreed. And based on that sealed report, I'd bet good money that whoever wanted him gone is still watching. Carter glanced at the shepherd. Then we don't have much time. He ended the call and stood, his decision made. Robert, I need your truck. Robert, who had been leaning against the doorway, frowned. Where the hell are you going? Denver, Carter said. I found Michael Evans. The drive to Denver. The drive was tense and silent. Carter kept his eyes on the road, his mind running through possible scenarios. If Evans was in a VA shelter, it meant he wasn't just hiding. He was surviving. And now, Carter was about to drag him right back into whatever he was running from. 2 hours later, he pulled up outside a modest but well-kept VA housing facility on the outskirts of Denver. The parking lot was mostly empty, except for a few beat-up cars and an old motorcycle leaning against the curb. Carter took a deep breath and stepped out. Inside, the front desk was manned by a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a knowing expression, the kind of person who had seen too many veterans struggling to find their place in the world. She barely glanced up. Help you? Carter flashed his badge. Looking for a resident. Name's Michael Evans. She stiffened slightly. We don't give out information on our vets. Carter leaned in, lowering his voice. He's in danger. If I don't find him first, someone else will. And I don't think they're coming to help. The woman hesitated, then sighed, scribbling something on a sticky note before sliding it toward him. Room 214. But if he tells you to leave, you leave. Carter nodded in thanks and headed down the hallway. The meeting room 214 was at the far end of the building. Carter knocked twice. Silence. Then, footsteps. Slow, cautious. The door creaked open, revealing a man in his late 30s, his face shadowed with exhaustion, his hair unkempt. His eyes were sharp, trained, a soldier's eyes. Michael Evans. Carter didn't speak immediately. He just watched as Evans scanned him, his body tense, like a man waiting for a fight. Finally, Evans broke the silence. "Who are you?" Carter kept his tone calm but firm. "Detective James Carter, Fort Collins PD. I'm not here to arrest you, Michael. I'm here about your dog." Evans' entire body went still. His hand tightened around the doorknob. "My dog's dead," he said flatly. Carter shook his head. "No, he's alive." A flicker of emotion, hope, disbelief, pain, flashed across Evans' face before he shut it down. "That's impossible." Carter took a step closer. He was found tied up in the woods, starving to death. Someone dumped him, but not before they left a note. He pulled it from his pocket and held it out. "Recognize the handwriting?" Evans' eyes locked onto the note. His breath hitched. Carter pressed on. Someone wanted him to live, and someone else wanted him dead. Evans finally took the note, his fingers shaking slightly as he read the familiar words. His jaw clenched, his eyes darkening with memories Carter couldn't begin to understand. Then, barely above a whisper, "Where is he?" The reunion an hour later, Carter pulled the truck into the Hayes driveway. The farmhouse was dark except for the soft glow of the fireplace inside. Evans sat in the passenger seat, his hands curled into fists on his lap. He hadn't spoken much on the drive back, just asked one question: "Does he still remember me?" Now, as Carter killed the engine, Evans hesitated. His breathing was shaky, his posture stiff. "You ready?" Carter asked. Evans swallowed hard. "I don't know." Before Carter could say anything, the front door opened, and a small figure darted out into the cold. "Emily." "Detective Carter," she called, then stopped mid-step when she saw the stranger beside him. Michael Evans stepped out of the truck, his movements slow, hesitant. He looked so different from the strong, confident soldier he must have once been. Emily stared at him. "Are you his owner?" Evans nodded once, his throat working like he was struggling for words. Then, from inside the house, a familiar bark. A loud, desperate bark. Before anyone could react, the shepherd shot out of the doorway, bolting across the yard like a missile. His paws hit the ground hard, his body moving on pure instinct. Evans barely had time to brace himself before 80 pounds of muscle slammed into him. The shepherd let out a high-pitched, almost broken whimper, burying his face into Evans' chest, his tail wagging so hard it looked painful. Evans let out a choked breath, his arms instinctively wrapping around the dog. His fingers gripped the fur tightly, his body trembling. "Jesus," he whispered. The dog whimpered again, licking his face, nudging his hands, as if to confirm he was real. Evans' breaths were ragged. Then, finally, he broke. His knees hit the ground, and he pulled the dog even closer, pressing his forehead against the shepherd's. His shoulders shook, his body wrecked with emotion he had clearly been holding in for years. Carter felt his throat tighten. He had seen a lot of things in his career, but this was something else. Emily watched, her own eyes brimming with tears. "He remembers you." Evans let out a breathless, tearful laugh. "Yeah," he whispered. "He does." But as he clung to his dog, Carter's instincts flared. Because Evans wasn't just crying out of relief. He was crying because he knew something they didn't. And whatever it wasn't over yet. Michael Evans sat on the living room floor of the farmhouse, his back resting against the worn-out couch. His arms were still wrapped around the shepherd, who refused to leave his side, as if afraid that if he let go, Evans would disappear again. The room was silent, except for the crackling of the fireplace and the occasional sniff from Evans. His fingers trembled as they ran through the dog's thick fur, tracing every scar, every patch of missing hair. Emily, Sophia, Robert, and Laura sat nearby, watching the reunion unfold. Detective Carter stood with his arms crossed, his eyes never leaving Evans' face. He had seen this kind of emotional breakdown before. The kind that only came after years of running, of hiding pain so deep it became part of your existence. Carter finally broke the silence. "You want to tell me what the hell is going on now?" Evans exhaled shakily, still not looking up. "I thought I lost him," he whispered. "I thought they killed him." Carter's jaw tightened. "Who's they?" Evans swallowed hard and finally lifted his eyes. There was something raw in them, something that screamed guilt, fear, and anger all at once. "You don't get it," he said, his voice hoarse. "If you found him, that means they know where I am now." Robert straightened. "You're saying the guy who was watching the house was after you?" Evans nodded. "They were probably making sure the dog was dead, and when they realized he wasn't." His breath hitched. "They'll come back." A chill ran through the room. Emily pulled her knees to her chest, glancing nervously at the windows. Carter took a slow step forward. "Michael, I need you to tell me everything. Right now." Evans rubbed his face, his fingers pressing against his temples like he was trying to push back the memories. Then, after a long moment, he finally spoke. "The truth about Michael Evans, I was a canine handler in the Army," Evans began. "Served 2 tours overseas. This guy here," he patted the shepherd's head. "His name is Max. He wasn't just a partner. He was a soldier." Carter nodded. "I already figured that out. Keep going." Evans took a deep breath. "After I got out, I tried to live a normal life. Settled here in Colorado. Took Max with me. Things were fine at first." He let out a bitter chuckle. "Then I made a mistake." Carter's eyes narrowed. "What kind of mistake?" Evans hesitated. "I got involved with the wrong people. Thought I was doing the right thing. But I was naive." Laura leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Evans' hands curled into fists. "I had a friend from the Army, Josh Parker. He came to me one night, said he needed help. Told me he was investigating something big, something that went all the way up to people with power. He didn't trust the cops, said he had proof, but he needed someone to help him get it out." Carter felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "Proof of what?" Evans' jaw tensed. "Military contracts. Illegal operations overseas. Stuff that wasn't supposed to exist." His voice turned bitter. "Turns out, some private defense contractors were running side ops. Arms deals, human trafficking, the whole 9 yards. Josh found a link between them and a few powerful figures here in the U.S. He was scared, but he knew if he exposed them, it could take them down." Emily's face paled. "And you helped him?" Evans nodded. "Yeah, and I shouldn't have." Carter's voice was sharp. "What happened next?" Evans let out a slow, shaky breath. "They found out. Before we could go public. The attack that changed everything. One night, I got home, and Max wasn't acting right," Evans continued. "He was trained to alert me if something was off, and that night, he was on edge." Carter exchanged a glance with Robert. "Like tonight," he murmured. Evans nodded grimly. "I didn't ignore it. I grabbed my gun and checked the house." His face darkened. "There were 3 men inside, waiting for me." Emily sucked in a breath. "Oh my God. They wanted to know where Josh was, where the files were. I told them I didn't know, and I meant it. I hadn't heard from him in days. But they didn't believe me." Evans' hands clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "They were going to kill me, right there in my own damn house." "But Max," Carter guessed. Evans nodded. "He attacked. Went straight for the guy with the gun. That gave me enough time to grab mine and take out the second guy. The third ran." His voice turned haunted. "But Max was injured. They shot him before they ran." Laura gasped. "You thought he was dead." Evans looked at the dog, his eyes heavy with guilt. "I carried him out, but when I went back to get the files, they were gone." He swallowed. "And so was Josh," Sophia whispered. "They took him?" Evans nodded. "Never saw him again. Never heard from him. The cops came after the gunfire, but the case went nowhere. The people behind this? They made sure it disappeared." He let out a bitter laugh. "They even tried to make it look like I was the problem, filed an assault charge against me. That's what's in that sealed report, isn't it?" Carter nodded slowly. "Yeah." Evans' voice was quiet. "I had no choice. I ran. I knew they'd come back, and next time, I wouldn't be so lucky. I thought Max was gone, so I left everything behind." Robert folded his arms. "But if they thought Max was dead, how did he end up in the woods?" Evans exhaled. "I don't know. But if they found him and realized he was alive." His face hardened. "That means they're still watching." A dangerous decision. The room fell into heavy silence. Then Carter spoke. "If they were willing to kill to protect their secret, they won't stop now." Evans met his eyes. No, they won't. Robert shook his head. So what do we do? Evans didn't hesitate. We end this. Carter raised an eyebrow. How? Evans looked down at Max, then back at Carter. Josh was smart. If he knew he was being hunted, he would have hidden a backup file somewhere. And if there's a chance that file is still out there, his voice turned sharp. We find it before they do. Carter exhaled. That's a damn big if. Evans nodded. It is. But if we don't do something, they'll keep hunting me. And now that you're all involved? His eyes moved to Emily and Sophia, his expression dark. They won't stop with just me. Laura pulled her daughters closer. We need to go to the police. Carter's face was grim. Not yet. If these guys have power at high levels, we need evidence before we can trust anyone. Evans stood up. Then we'd better start looking. Because if they know I'm back, we don't have much time. Carter met his gaze. Where do we start? Evans exhaled. With the last place Josh ever went. And just like that, they had a mission. The farmhouse felt different now. Heavier, tense, alive with the weight of an impending storm. Everyone in the room understood that after tonight, their lives would never be the same. Michael Evans sat at the kitchen table, his fingers absent-mindedly running through Max's fur. The shepherd lay beside him, his body relaxed but his eyes constantly scanning the room. Ever the soldier, ever the protector. Detective Carter stood near the doorway, arms crossed, his mind working through every possible outcome of what they were about to do. He had dealt with dangerous people before, but this was something else. This wasn't just about bringing criminals to justice. This was about survival. Robert and Laura exchanged nervous glances, knowing their peaceful life on the farm had just been thrust into a war they never asked for. And Emily? She sat quietly at the table, staring at the map Carter had spread out. The weight of the situation was clear in her eyes, but there was also something else, a quiet, unwavering determination. She had found Max, and now she was going to make sure this story had the ending it deserved. The last clue. Carter tapped his pen on the map. Evans, you said the last time you saw Josh, he had the files with him. Where was that? Evans sighed, running a hand through his hair. There's an old motel on the outskirts of Denver, run down, barely standing. It was the last place we met before everything went to hell. Carter frowned. And you never went back? Evans' jaw tightened. Didn't have the chance. By the time I tried, there were already people watching it. I figured they took everything. Robert leaned forward. But what if they didn't? Evans nodded. Josh was smart. If he knew they were onto him, he wouldn't have kept everything in one place. He would have had a backup. He hesitated. I just don't know where. Emily's voice was soft but certain. Max might. Everyone turned to her. She pointed at the dog, who was still watching them, alert. He found something in the woods before. What if he knows where Josh hid the files? Evans stared at his dog. You think he remembers? Carter shrugged. He remembered you. Why not this? Evans exhaled. All right. We go to the motel. Into the fire. The drive to Denver was quiet. No one spoke much. There was too much at stake. Carter drove, Evans in the passenger seat, Max sitting alert in the back with Robert. Laura had stayed behind with the girls, though the worry in her eyes had been impossible to ignore. The motel was exactly as Evans had described, a decaying relic of the past, sitting in the middle of nowhere like a forgotten ghost. Carter parked across the street, his instincts on high alert. You sure about this? Robert asked. Nope, Carter muttered. But we don't have a choice. Evans took a deep breath, his eyes locked on the motel's dark windows. Let's go. They moved quickly but carefully. The lobby was empty, the air stale, thick with the scent of dust and old cigarette smoke. Evans led them down the hall. Josh's room was 108. As they reached the door, Max suddenly froze. His ears shot up, his entire body going rigid. Then, he growled. Carter stopped cold. He knew that sound. It wasn't a warning growl. It was a threat. Evans immediately drew his gun. Carter motioned for Robert to stay behind and slowly reached for the doorknob. He twisted it. Unlocked. That was never a good sign. Taking a deep breath, he pushed the door open. And there, in the dimly lit room, was a man. slumped in a chair, head tilted forward, lifeless. Evans took one step inside before his breath caught in his throat. "Josh," he whispered. The truth comes out, Josh Parker was dead. The body had been there for at least a day, maybe more. The room had been ransacked, but something felt off. Carter scanned the area. Whoever did this wasn't looking for money. They were looking for information. Evans swallowed hard, his hands clenching into fists. They got to him. Robert frowned. But if they got what they wanted, why leave the body here? Carter was about to answer when Max suddenly barked. Everyone turned. The dog had moved toward the vent near the floor, scratching at the old grate. Evans rushed over. "Move, buddy." He pried the vent cover off, and inside, stuffed deep within, was a small flash drive. Silence. Evans pulled it out, staring at it like he couldn't believe it was real. Carter met his eyes. "You think that's what he was trying to hide?" Evans nodded, his face grim. Only one way to find out. The final showdown, they didn't even make it back to the truck before the headlights appeared. A black SUV rolled up fast, skidding to a stop. Carter immediately drew his gun, pushing Evans behind him. The doors opened. 3 men stepped out. Their suits were expensive. Their expressions were blank, but their eyes were cold. One of them, tall, sharp, with graying hair, took a step forward. "Mr. Evans," he said smoothly, "we've been looking for you." Evans gritted his teeth. "Yeah? You should have left me dead." The man smirked. "That would have been easier. But you have something we need." His eyes flickered to the flash drive in Evans' hand. Carter tightened his grip on his gun. "If you were smart, you'd turn around and leave." The man chuckled. "Oh, detective, I don't think you understand. You're not walking away from this." Then, everything happened at once. One of the men reached inside his coat. Carter fired first, the shot echoing through the parking lot. Evans grabbed Robert and ducked behind a car. Max, sensing the danger, lunged forward, teeth bared. Chaos erupted. Gunshots. Shouts. The crunch of metal as bullets tore into cars. Max slammed into one of the men, taking him down hard. Carter fired again, hitting the second guy in the leg. The leader, the graying man, staggered back, realizing the tide had turned. His face twisted with fury. "You have no idea what you've started," he spat. Evans stepped forward, gripping the flash drive. "No, you have no idea what's about to end." The man hesitated, then turned and ran to the SUV. The tires screeched as it sped off into the night. Silence settled. Evans exhaled. "It's over." Carter looked at him. "No, but it will be." He held up the flash drive. "Let's make sure this gets to the right people." A new beginning. 1 week later, the files went public. The corrupt officials were arrested. The private contractors were exposed. And Michael Evans? He finally stopped running. He and Max stayed on the Hayes farm for a while, healing, rebuilding. One morning, as the sun rose over the fields, Evans knelt beside Max, scratching behind his ears. "You saved my life, buddy," he murmured. "Guess that makes us even." Max just wagged his tail. Emily giggled. "He's not done protecting you." Evans smiled. "Yeah, I don't think he ever will be." And for the first time in a long time, he felt safe. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell, and if you watched until now, comment, "I watched until here," and share your opinion about this story. Oh, and don't forget to watch the next video on the final screen. It's really exciting.